with Helen Fielding in conversation with Meru Gokhale. This session is proudly presented by Red FM. And I'm absolutely delighted to introduce the speakers to you. Helen Fielding is an English novelist, journalist, and screenwriter, best known as the creator of Bridget Jones, one of the most iconic fictional characters of the 20th century. Her novels include Bridget Jones' Diary, Bridget Jones' The Edge of Reason, Bridget Jones' Baby, The Diaries, and Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy. And Helen was also part of the screenwriting team on the films based on the first of these three novels. Meru Gokhale is the editor-in-chief of literary publishing at Penguin Random House, India. Please join me in giving Helen Fielding and Meru Gokhale a very, very warm welcome.
Why don't you come here? Can you hear me? Great, I can see lots of Bridget Jones fans in the audience. So first of all, I'm going to start by welcoming you to India, Helen, and to Jaipur. Have you been to India before?
Yes, I came.
Can you hear her?
Can you hear?
I can't hear you.
Yeah. So. Okay. All right. I came years and years ago when I was a hippie, as a backpacker, staying more in hostels and traveling on the train, and I loved it. I love Jaipur, and it's really exciting to be here today and wake up and see the mountains and all the color and all the excitement. It's really wonderful.
And what was it like traveling around as a hippie? How old were you? And tell us about some of the experiences you had.
I was sort of in my 30s, and we were very giddy and giggly. And at one point it struck us that it was funny to have cows in the street. And so we were always laughing because everywhere we went there was a cow, even though we understood the sacredness of it. We went to Jaisalmer. We were two young girls. And one night a man burst into our room wearing a dhoti and a turban and then went, "Oh, I'm frightfully sorry," and then went out again. So there were all sorts of strange things. We went on a camel safari and up in Jaisalmer. So I really loved it. I'm happy to be back.
And we're absolutely delighted to have you back here. Now, as when you were introduced, it was said that you have created one of the most iconic female characters of the 20th century. Why do you think Bridget Jones caught people's imagination in that way? What is it about her that everyone felt they could connect with?
When I started writing Bridget, it was an anonymous column in a newspaper. I was very broke, and I was a journalist. And if I'd known so many people were going to read it, I would never have dared write it. And I think it was that freedom from self-consciousness that allowed me to be honest. And I think in the modern world now, especially with so much Facebook and Instagram and so much emphasis on presenting perfection and a version of people that doesn't really exist, the best picture, the best moment, that what is neglected is how you really feel inside. And I think Bridget is about the gap between how we all feel we're expected to be and how we actually are. And I think that was the little thing at the heart, that without me even knowing I was doing it, accidentally caught people's attention.
And as you just said, the fact that you were able to write this column anonymously gave you a kind of freedom to be able to express yourself, which if you had been more self-conscious, that people had known that it was you, you wouldn't have been able to be quite so honest about how difficult it is and how funny and how complicated it is to be a woman, a single woman in her 30s in London. So I've asked you to read a little bit from here in which you describe beautifully what it's like. This is from Sunday, 15th January, so not too long ago.
Okay. Sunday, the 15th of January. 9 stone. Excellent. Alcohol units 0. Cigarettes 29. VV bad, especially in 2 hours. Calories 3,879. Repulsive. Negative thoughts 942, approximately, based on average per minute. Minutes spent counting negative thoughts 127, approximately. 6 p.m. Completely exhausted by an entire day of date preparation. Being a woman is worse than being a farmer. There is so much harvesting and crop spraying to be done. Legs to be waxed, underarms shaved, eyebrows plucked, feet pumiced, skin exfoliated and moisturized, spots cleansed, roots dyed, eyelashes tinted, nails filed, cellulite massaged, stomach muscles exercised. The whole performance is so highly tuned, you only need to neglect it for a few days for the whole thing to go to seed. Sometimes I wonder what I would be like if left to revert to nature, with a full beard and handlebar moustache on each shin. Dennis Healy eyebrows, face a graveyard of dead skin cells, spots erupting, long curly fingernails like Struhl Peter, blind as a bat, and stupid runt of species as no contact lenses, flabby body flobbing around, and is it any wonder girls have no confidence?
Thank you. How many people in the audience, how many women in the audience have felt like that at some point or the other? There you go. That's why Bridget Jones connects with everybody. Of all ages, I think everyone feels like that at some point or the other. Now, Bridget was a character from the 1990s. You've written in your book about the #1 dating rule. Would you like to tell the audience about what that is? And is that dating rule still relevant today? Or more relevant?
Do not text when drunk.
Is it still relevant today?
Yes. It is.
And how do you think Bridget would have navigated the very, very complicated dating rules of today, which are, they're constantly shifting sands, aren't they? If she had been 30 today, what are the kind of problems do you think she would have come up against?
I think they're essentially the same problems, but technology makes them ever more complex. But I still, at my age, this week spent about 4 hours one morning interpreting texts that a friend of mine was getting from a gentleman caller.
Can you give us some examples?
I can't actually disclose that one, but we spent hours discussing it and discussing the replies and analysing it.
It's like, when you send a text and an iPhone, you can sort of tell when someone is writing and the 3 little dots. Don't you think they're really confusing?
Yeah, and then it disappears. But I think it's, whether it's sort of now or Jane Austen's day, there are all these little codes. People tend to talk in code when they're dating, and it's all guessing and second guessing. And I think that that's very good if you're a novelist, because it adds to the suspense, but it's not so good if you're the person dating, because it's very difficult for men and women to understand what the other person means or wants. And Bridget often observes that dating's like a war, with sort of generals planning strategies and analysing the opposition. And I think all these different apps it's almost become certain with teenagers now, they almost don't bother to meet in public. Like, who does that? And certainly people are horrified if you ring up someone, if you actually telephone them.
Yeah, that's considered
like,
really
what?
strange now. Nobody does that anymore, right? You have to text somebody and fix up a time to get on the phone.
Yes, it's so odd. But yeah.
So if she had been around right now as a young woman, where do you think she would have embarrassed herself the most? Would it have been Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram? The possibilities are endless for Bridget.
Well, I did once try Bridget doing Twitter in the 4th book, Mad About the Boy. I did Twitter for 3 months to just experiment with how bad it could be. So she did the classic thing of tweeting when drunk. And she went into a whole thing about birds and how she hated birds, and then in the morning she had to apologize to birds in general. So I think she would struggle with getting carried away and having too many glasses of wine and getting online. There's actually a program now you can get on a computer or phone which knows when you're drunk. And so if you're
It's like
typing,
a breathalyzer for iPhones.
if you're typing erratically, it shuts you down. So I think Bridget would probably really find that very useful indeed.
Do you think the world needs this invention, a breathalyzer for iPhone? Now, I'm going to ask you a question which I'm sure you've been asked before. How much of Bridget is based on you and your friends?
Well, I always used to deny that she had anything to do with me at all, and say that I don't drink or smoke and I am a virgin. But that was really because when it first came...
That's why you're dressed in white.
Yes. So pure. When it first came out, it was completely unexpected. I really thought I was writing the column to pay the mortgage while I wrote my very serious book about cultural divides in the Caribbean. And so I had never expected anyone to read it, really. And so to have it suddenly become very, very public, an exaggerated version of the
How
truth.
did it become public? Because you started out anonymously. So how did you get discovered, or did you come out on your own?
I started writing the column in the Independent newspaper in London. They asked me to write it as myself, and I said no, because ironically enough, that would be too exposing and embarrassing. And then I was writing on the political desks, so everyone was writing about Chechnya and that sort of thing. So I kept it, I didn't tell anyone it was me because it seemed silly. And then after about 6 weeks, people started to praise the column, including some of my friends. So being as shallow as a puddle, I at that point said, "It's me," and started to boast about the column. And then we got more and more letters, including my favourite, which was to the editor of The Independent, and it said, "Dear Sir, I would quite like to shag Bridget Jones. Could you let me have her phone number, please? Many thanks, yours faithfully." Very, very polite.
But now tell me a little bit about your first book, because you've talked about sort of the hypocrisies around celebrity culture and people adopting countries and things like that. How did that come about, this early tell us a little bit about your early pre-Bridget phase of your career.
Well, tragically, I have always wanted to be taken seriously. Many people complain that Bridget Jones is silly. I actually disagree, and one Italian reviewer said it was a transcendental study of existential despair. That could have been a translation issue, but I'm with the Italians on that. But actually, my first book was set in a refugee camp in the Sudan, but nobody bought that one. I was a journalist for a long time, working in East Africa. My sister lived in Kenya for a long time, and during the sort of late 80s famines and things, I worked a bit for Comic Relief and went out to those camps on the East Coast. So the book I wrote was about the way celebrities and famine depend on each other. It's a sort of oddly symbiotic relationship.
Are you going to take any names?
What?
Are you going to take any names?
Names of celebrities? No. That would be very, very silly. But I did have some funny moments out there. Like, you make these assumptions. And we did some filming with a guy in the Red Sea Hills about how dire the situation was. It was really an emergency. And he spoke very eloquently, and we were almost all in tears. And then when we stopped rolling, he went, "How did I do?" And I had this similar experience. I just took my kids to Kenya to show them a little bit about how the Samburu tribe were living. And at one point I said to my son, "Will you come off that iPhone?" And he wasn't. He was carving a stick with a knife, but the Samburu warrior was playing a game on his iPhone. So I love it when cultural things sort of surprise you and upend your assumptions and stereotypes.
Yeah. And speaking of assumptions and stereotypes, you moved to LA, and you've always been a London girl. What is the difference between British humor and American humor, and how do you survive without British humor in America?
Well, when I first took Bridget out to America, there was an open letter in London's Evening Standard from Christopher Hitchens saying, don't take her to America. They won't understand. They don't understand irony or self-deprecation. But that turned out not to be true, because actually the book did very well out there. And I think probably it's just much more of a cultural thing for the British to laugh at themselves. It's seen as very bad form to boast. If you meet your girlfriends, you do not say, oh, look at me, I'm so tall and thin and beautiful, and what a wonderful day I've had, and my career's going great. You say, oh my God, you wouldn't believe what I've just done. And that's the general tone. But I do think that once you crack the shell of anybody, there's the same sort of tender creature inside. And so I think it's just not a cultural norm in America to knock yourself quite as much, but they enjoy it hugely when people do.
Bridget Jones's diary is dedicated to your mother.
Yes.
For not being like Bridget's mother.
Yes.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about Bridget's mother and where you got the inspiration to create a character like that? Because she is so damaged and endearing and funny, and everybody loves her. Can you tell them a little bit about her and how you came up with her?
Well, I suppose some of Bridget's mother was based on my mother's turn of phrase, which I always find very funny. It's so complicated. It's a sort of Northern England thing. So I once took her to do a restaurant review in a very fancy restaurant, and they had profiteroles, and she said, she was a cookery teacher, she said, well, if I'd made these, I'd have considered them a failure. I'd have thrown them away and opened a tin of pears. So she's very precise, and she talks a lot about food. So Bridget's mother is from that post-war generation where much of their vocabulary is infused with food. And they're very specific about colours, which are also food-based. So it would be like crushed raspberry dress or a burnt plum.
Or melon.
Yes, I think you'd be
just like
melon.
Me today.
Yeah. But I also think Bridget's mother comes from a generation where they're very certain about everything. They were brought up before technology and the media, in one place with one set of values after the war, and it was very much that sort of British thing, if you work hard and you're honest and you stand together, then everything will be fine, and that is what you're going to do. And then Bridget, the next generation, was suddenly in this explosion of media and all these ideas of all these different things you could be. You could be a wife, a mother, a businesswoman. A feminist was just one of the things you ought to be being. You could be a star, you could be famous, you could be thin, you could, all these things. And so the two of them together represent two very different eras. And I think the other thing about Bridget's mother, which actually I explored more in the later books and also in the musical that I'm working on, is the idea that she constantly undermines her daughter by trying to change her and trying to suggest that she wears something else or eats something else or does something else. And I think that's a stereotype that lots of women are familiar with and lots of mums sort of learn from when they read it. You know.
So do you mean, one of the things about Bridget as she progresses through the books, she goes from Bridget Jones's diary, which she's single, she goes on to the sequel, and to The Edge of Reason, and then to Mad About the Boy. But all through the books, as she grows older, the situation changes, but Bridget more or less remains the same. Do you believe people change, or do you think that, just like her, we all just sort of muddle along and things will turn out all right in the end?
I think people fundamentally remain the same, but I do think some people are really good at evolving and learning and adapting. And I think she does adapt a bit in the later books, but she's still the same inside. And I think the same is true of friends. People keep their friends for a long time, through decades, really.
And old boyfriends like Daniel, who stays in her life.
So they're never really going to change that much. You know, they'll always come back to basics. Daniel will still be sort of having a crack at her and say, "Oh, Bridget, I suppose a romp would be out of the question." And
One of the things I thought we'd do, and we talked about this yesterday, is we'd like to involve the audience a little bit early on in the questions. So how many of you have questions for Helen? I thought we'll take one question and we'll sort of evolve the conversation and include everybody along with us. There's a lady over here. Would you like to ask your question? And before you go, can I ask you one more question? Tell us about smug marrieds.
Oh, that was an expression coined by one of my friends, actually. When we were in our 30s, everybody all got married like dominoes all at the same time. And so we just coined this expression, smug marrieds, which is the people that make you feel like a bit of a fool for not being married. You know.
How many people can identify with that in India, the pressure to get married? Please go ahead. What's your name?
I'm Shrila. Hi, I'm a huge fan of Bridget Jones. I've always read her through my life. And like the one thing that I've always wondered growing up is how chick lit, or the kind of books that the category of Bridget Jones falls into, they're not as respected. They're not considered like deep books, but I feel like they bring about a lot of social change with their readers, right? Like your idea changes, you do like accept your body more or whatever based on what the character's feeling. I wanted to know your opinion about that. Like, why do you think people don't consider these books as important as, say, political books or anything that is very directly about social change, as opposed to something like chick lit, which kind of brings about social change without talking about it, but through the experiences of its characters?
I think it's a very interesting question, and I think it's a question which applies to comedy in general. Certainly in America, the satirical programs like Saturday Night Live are playing a huge part in the debate about Trump. The question is what difference are they making? I think in terms of something like Bridget, which is reflecting a trend in society, clearly, because so many people would not have bought that book if it hadn't zeroed in on something that was out of step in the way women were being presented from how they actually were. So I think society's full of oppressive stereotypes for women, and the idea of the tragic barren spinster, the Miss Havisham figure, representing a woman in her 30s who was not married, was hopelessly outdated in 1996 and needed to be addressed. A single woman in her 30s who wasn't married did not have an identity at that point which wasn't vaguely embarrassing and shameful, and it's ridiculous. And so I think the fact that you can take that identity and give it a name, give it a personality, and explore it and talk about it is very helpful. It wasn't intentional on my part, but I was very, very pleased that other people started writing the same sort of thing and identified with it. And I think it's hugely important. I mean, it's all over the place. If you look at the issue, there's another oppressive stereotype, which is the woman of a certain age, which is beyond a certain age, a woman is not sexually viable. And if you look at how men and women who are older are portrayed in movies, it's really shocking. The way that a 75-year-old man can be seen as a total male lead with a 20-year-old girlfriend and nobody bats an eyelid. But if you throw it the other way around, it's shocking. Like a movie like Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool is great. And I think that there's been a few things recently in the Sundance Festival. A woman of 75 has made a movie about being that age. She calls it Women of Age, you know, almost like women of colour. But I think that needs addressing. And I think fiction and movies and the arts are a very effective means of just changing perceptions in society. And often society is represented wrongly in fiction and in the arts, and it needs to be corrected.
There's a lady over here. But before you go, I just want to ask you a little bit about the film version of Bridget Jones's Diary. Renée Zellweger, who played Bridget in the movie, had to put on a huge amount of weight to play the role. And she also interned as an assistant in a publishing house, didn't she? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think there's lots of publishers and people who are interested in how that works. What's she like?
I didn't actually know about it at the time. It was kept very quiet because it could have got in the papers. But yeah, she was very conscientious, and she went and tried out and worked anonymously in a publishing house and picked up the accent and all that sort of thing. And they're all great fun, all three of the actors. Hugh Grant in particular is very funny, and a lot of the lines in the first movie, like there's a scene where he's seducing Bridget, and she's worried because she's wearing the giant mummy pants. And he says, "Oh, don't worry, I'm wearing something rather similar myself. Oh, mummy." And that was one of Hugh's ad-libs. So he's very good.
What's your name?
My name is Fazana. I'm from Bangladesh. Two questions. What was the influence of Jane Austen in the book? And the second was, have a thought of writing about the male perspective in similar situations?
Well, with the relationship with Jane Austen, I just stole the plot. I thought it had been very well market researched over a number of centuries, and she probably wouldn't mind in any way she was dead. As far as writing from a male perspective, I think I would find it very difficult. I often try to write in the third person, and it never works. And I think I just tend to write in that one particular voice. I tend to get very sort of annoying. I even annoy myself in the third person. I get rather portentous and grand.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lady over here. We should take some questions from the back, because I know there's lots of hands which have been raised. What's your name?
Hi,
Any men with questions, by the way, be prepared.
Hi, my name's Tanvi. I am a huge fan, ma'am. I mean, your book's gotten me through like really tough times as well. And I remember as a teenager when I first read the book, something from the last back cover really stuck to me. And I think it was a quote, a review by Salman Rushdie that said that even men will laugh. And I think as a teen, that was the first time I came face to face with this kind of gender bias that might have existed in the literature field. So as you know, the author and the brand ambassador for Bridget, could you speak about challenges you faced around gender when you were taking this book to the mainstream and in the aftermath of its success?
Well, I think, again, I hadn't really thought about it when I started writing it. I think I was conscious that it had more of a gay following than a straight male following. And certainly the movies, it's sort of a date night thing, you know, that you're going to go with your girlfriend sort of thing. The later book, Bridget Jones, Mad About the Boy, where it's talking about Bridget becoming a widow, that, interestingly, had much more of a male readership, straight male readership. And I think it was because it was just dealing with general issues about being single when you're older and dating when you're older and things like that. But I think the thing with Bridget is that for women, when they're out together, the currency is to laugh, really, and to talk about, to share things that have gone wrong, to share humiliations, and to celebrate a sort of sense of humor and humanity. And I'm not sure it's quite the same with men. I remember one time when a friend of mine had separated from his wife of 20 years, and my boyfriend went out with him and two other guys to talk about it with him. And when he came home, I said, "So what happened? Why did they break up?" And my boyfriend said, "Oh, we didn't talk about it. We just talked about baseball." So I think maybe in that sense, women understand it a little bit more, you know.
Helen, why do you think that is that men find it so hard to laugh amongst themselves in that way? Do you think they're just more afraid of being vulnerable around each other?
I don't know. I mean, I'm always asking them.
Do you think we should ask some men in the audience?
Yeah, why is that then?
Why do men find it so hard to be vulnerable around each other? Does any man in the audience want to answer that? Or is it just a stereotype?
Or would it make you feel too vulnerable to answer?
There's a man in the audience who wants to answer this question.
There's a man in the audience, everyone.
Please introduce yourself. You are now officially vulnerable. Let's give him a big hand. Lots of applause for when you're vulnerable.
Yeah, I'm Prashant, and I do love your books and movies, by the way. And
Thank you.
I'd just like to say, we just love to talk about how great we are. We're not very good at talking about how not good we are. So I think
but why?
Other than that, I don't know. We just feel it's a sense of ego, a sense of self. As men, we're encouraged and taught to be strong and powerful and in charge and wise. And being vulnerable and stupid is not something that fits very comfortably with our sense of self and ego.
But do you think that, is it that you actually genuinely think you're great, or is it that...
I love you. She's amazing. Give her a big hand.
Or is it that actually, secretly, you are insecure, but you just don't want to tell anyone?
Of course we are insecure inside, of course.
How many insecure men in the audience? Raise your hand. That's great.
But
I said, how many insecure men in the audience?
Yes,
Raise your hand.
count them.
Come on, we're counting. And those men who don't raise their hands, you're really
it's
insecure.
Growing. It's a growing movement. We've started a movement. Insecure men everywhere.
#Me Too Insecure.
We're just extremely good at blocking out negative events in our life. And I will remember all the amazing things that happened in my life, and I will block out anything bad that happens. And that's how we create that sense of self-greatness and confidence to survive.
Well, that's a good idea.
You're very honest.
That's a good idea. Maybe men and women
thank
should
you
get
for sharing
together. Maybe men and women should breed, and then they'd, oh, wait.
That's an idea which
already
has
tried
been
that.
tried before. Yeah. Okay, who's going to go next after this person who's been wonderful? Any other men? Or nobody wants to try?
You're not a man. Or are you?
There's a gentleman over here.
I think I want to echo what the previous gentleman said, but it's our mothers, our daughters, our girlfriends that are also giving us ways to operate. Don't always work for us, but often that stereotype is perpetuated by women.
You mean they're forcing you to be more manly and not admit to weakness?
I just know that in a patriarchal society, that patriarchy is harmful to men, and that as a single parent, by adoption, I was often marginalized by society, being a man as a primary parent. So whether it's not people telling us how to behave, but sometimes culturally, I think it's different in India as well, from America and the UK, but certainly the nuance is there from our parents and how we should behave. And that impacts on us. It also comes in the school. I can see that patriarchy and favoring of genders does impact on us as men.
That's a very interesting point. Mm-hmm.
I think you raised a really good point. Just like in your books, women have pressures on them to be a certain way. And as you rightly said, do you think that men also have pressures to be manly? And tell us a little bit about that amongst the people you know. Do you think that's a character that's waiting to be written? A man who has to face the same kind of pressures to be a man the way Bridget does to be a certain type of woman?
I think it is a thing, and I think we'll see more and more men writing about it. A friend of mine called Tim Samuels, who does a thing called Men's Hour on Radio 4, has written a book called Who Stole My Spear? And it's about just that. It's about who am I as a man now? What am I supposed to be doing? What does masculinity mean? And as society changes, as women get more women are great multitaskers, so they're very capable. So as society shifts, I think it is confusing for some men to figure out how do they form relationships with evolved women, and what are they supposed to be doing themselves? Are they supposed to be being macho, or are they supposed to be being understanding and insecure? Or it's a whole identity shift. I think it's very interesting. See where
And I
it
suppose
leads.
it's so confusing. I mean, what do you think is the most confusing aspect of dating today?
I think when you get group texts and send it to the wrong person within the texts, probably. I think online...
Have you ever done that?
I refuse to comment. I think online dating is sort of, in one way, it's quite sensible, because it's better than people going into a bar and saying, well, how much do you mind if I don't like running on the beach and I'm vaguely out of shape, and, you know, what religion are you? But I think it's become like online shopping. So I've had people report that they've gone back to sort of Ocado, a grocery store, and got upset that the things they put in their basket didn't wink back at them. And I think that thing of constant replacement, constant choice, so people use it almost as if they're feeling lonely, so they'll go online and say hello to all sorts of people, and then they're just, oh, I'm fine today, I'm not going to do that today. And so people are picked up and dropped. And I think, especially for young men, there's a lot of research that shows their attention spans with women are really limited, so that they're finding it very hard to actually commit to a relationship, because there's just an endless supply of women online that they can swipe
So
through.
do you think there is such a thing as too much choice?
Yes, I do, definitely. With everything, even if I'm trying to buy a kettle, I have too much choice. Yeah.
Who's going to ask the next question? Let's take something from the back of the venue. There's somebody waving quite frantically there. Let's get a mic to you.
Hi. So my question is, if you could just talk a little bit about...
We can't really hear you. Could you speak up?
Okay, yeah. So how much of Bridget is Elizabeth, like from Pride and Prejudice? I would like you to talk about it.
I couldn't really hear you. How much
Sorry.
of Bridget is what?
Elizabeth from Pride and Prejudice. Jane
Oh.
Austen. Yeah.
Well, you know, that's a very interesting question, Elizabeth, because I always felt that although Bridget seems very silly, she's actually quite a moral person. So she never blames things on anyone except herself. She's not bitter, and she's quite strict about doing the right thing and being good to people and having integrity. So I base a lot of her on Elizabeth Bennet in a way. And she's got a certain amount of dignity in a funny sort of way, even though you wouldn't expect it of her. But she won't let herself, in the end, be pushed around by a Daniel Cleaver. And she won't take an insulting invitation for a date from Mark Darcy any more than Elizabeth would from Mr. Darcy. And I must say, I get very confused between Mark Darcy, Mr. Darcy, and Colin Firth. And in my mind, they've all become exactly the same person.
That's something I was going to ask you earlier, actually. When Renée Zellweger played the role of Bridget Jones, did your own perception of Bridget evolve? I mean, do you sometimes get confused between the movie Bridget and the book Bridget?
Yes, I do. In fact, I could never cast the role because for me, I write it through the eyes of Bridget, so I never actually saw Bridget. The only person I ever saw was the original picture of her, which was on the cover of the first book. And that was just a secretary at the Independent that we took a picture of. And she was just sort of a little dark and mysterious. So when Renée took the part, I was quite... It took me a while to get used to it. And now I think if I'm writing a Bridget novel, I write it just... I'm just seeing the world, I'm not seeing her. But if I'm writing a movie, then I would write it for Renée.
I want to ask you a question which is Bridget related, but more about your writing process, since you talked about visualizing her in that way, and you obviously saw somebody and you saw that could be her. How many of you in the audience are writers or want to be writers? So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process for the people here in the audience? Because I think any first-time writer finds it incredibly hard to take an idea which they feel very attached to and they feel it's strong. How do you actually turn it into a book? In your case, of course, you started with the columns, but how do you sort of make that leap from idea to written anything?
Well, I always want to be that person that's very organized and sits at a white table with a single white flower and a laptop and writes for 3 hours every day. But I'm quite chaotic in the sense that at the moment, for example, I've got probably 3 ideas going that I'm trying to get them to go and just scribbling things down, and none of them's quite working. But then when one of them gets going, then I kind of splurge down a load of material, most of which I won't use, but it's very cathartic and quite emotional stuff. And then I'll go back and look at that and decide, okay, what is it? And highlight things that are funny, and what's at the heart of it, what's it mean, what's it about, and then really ditch all the rest, and then go back and structure it really quite tightly. And then there's a delicious phase where I always feel it's like doing a tapestry or something. You're finding all these threads that work together and pulling it out so that when something like Bridget's finished, it looks really frothy and light, but actually underneath it's really carefully structured, and you've got your theme at the bottom, and then you've got all your characters, and then you've got your jokes, which are all tied into the theme, and things echo each other and all tied together, and it's got a proper 3-act structure. So it's quite mechanical, really. And usually when I start writing and I've got a blank page, I tend to panic, and so I'll go to a cafe or somewhere, because then instead of sitting at home feeling insecure, I go into the cafe where there's other people writing. I think, oh my God, I've had all these things published, and I feel really good about myself, and that boosts my confidence, you know.
No, it's so true, because there's such a myth, isn't there, about this perfect writer sitting at this empty desk and very minimalist. And I suppose social media also encourages people to think in terms of perfectionism when life is just really quite messy.
Yes, exactly, yeah.
Let's get a question from over there.
Good afternoon.
What's your name?
My name is Mrinal. I have got my first Bridget Jones when I was 13. Today I'm 30 and I am still inspired by your book in every way possible. My question to you is, what made you inspired by the self-depreciating humor in Bridget, and what made you decide on the character which is insecure yet so accomplished in every way possible?
I think I was just writing from the inside rather than the outside. So when I started writing it, it was just a diary. And it was just very honest series of thoughts at that time in my life. I was a journalist in my 30s. I kind of based it on my university diaries, which consisted, I really had no social arrangement, but just lists of food. So it would be sort of carrot, 10 calories, yogurt, 100 calories, box of milk tray chocolates, 3,084 calories. So it was really a very internal, unself-conscious internal monologue. And I think it just came from there. It wasn't really planned.
There's a lady over there. After that, can you give it to the gentleman over there? Because every time a man raises his hand, I'm going to give you the mic.
How did you cope up with the success of writing Bridget Jones, and how did you escape the spiral of writing it and writing something else after that?
Well, when the success first happened, it didn't happen very suddenly. It was a slow burn. When it first went to #1, I was so excited, and I still got the Sunday Times list with it at the top of it, and I stuck it inside the lid of a box because I didn't want anyone else to see me hanging it up. and I think what I did initially was I sort of panicked and just kept everything the same. Same car that kept breaking down, same flat, same friends. And then I gradually expanded. But I still felt if I bought a handbag, all the money would go away. It's quite hard to adjust. Money's a strange thing. But obviously it was wonderful, and it was a wonderful thing to happen to any freelance journalist. In terms of feeling sort of oppressed by expectation, what I do is I just avoid that. So if I'm writing another Bridget book, I don't tell anyone. So I just sit there and quietly write it on my own until it's ready. And then I show it to someone, because otherwise I just get too self-conscious. And also people get, when you have a success, people get very invested in it. So everyone tries to get you to change it all the time. So yeah, I just do it that way. I just keep it private.
Helen, I want to ask you something related to what you just said. In your books, Bridget's friends are her family.
Yes.
And this is an increasingly modern phenomenon that friends replace families for people who move out. They work in different places from their parents, and they create a kind of cocoon around them. Tell us a bit about that. What is the effect that has on people?
Well, I think that what's happened with the way people live in cities, and the fact that the nuclear family is less and less the norm, perhaps. You can't generalize. But people need families, they need community, and it's been proved by surveys, as Bridget always says, that one of the great measures of happiness is community. So people just evolve and construct their families out of those around them. So in Bridget's instance, her girlfriends, her gay friends, her smug married friends, her friends in the city become her family, and then her blood family lives somewhere else. And that's very often true, I think, of people in cities. And then often people go around saying, oh, I'm all alone, and Bridget does that, I'm alone and I don't have a husband and this. And then her friends will come around and say, what are you talking about? Because they're there just as much as any family is, except that they're a selected family. So I think it's quite a social movement in a way, I think. Obviously it differs from country to country and society to society, but I think it's a good thing. And I think I think that's another thing about Bridget Jones in the social media age, that social media generally does not celebrate friendship, does not celebrate kindness, loyalty, supportiveness. Those sorts of things don't tend to come out in an Instagram post. And I think what is touching to me about the reaction to Bridget is that she is all about warmth, humanity, imperfection, vulnerability, but she is kind. And it's really important increasingly in the world that those qualities are not forgotten about and not diminished. And I think similarly with people getting older, there's a real danger of, in certain societies, of old people really being marginalized, particularly the more, even in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, it's a hard place for old people. And so I think all the trends of inclusion, there's movements to bring together teenagers and old people with, or I should say people of age now, to unite them with technology so that they connect, the younger people can teach them how to operate the older technology. And I hope there'll be much more thought that goes into how that older generation who are living longer and healthier is defined. There's a lot of oppressive stereotypes about them too.
My question to Helen.
Would you introduce yourself?
Yes, I am Dr. H.R. Swami, retired professor from Government of Rajasthan. I am academic writer. I have written more than 24 academic books. I want to write my memoirs. I just want to know how writing memoir is different than academic writing, I have one problem. I have pressure from my friends not to write. On the other hand, my daughter say, Papa, you do write. My friends say, you can't imagine what we'll do with you because you will expose us, yourself, and our children will laugh at us. So what should I do?
What should he do?
I think you should do it.
Okay, this lady over here first, please. I think we have time for 2 more questions. That lady first.
Hi, I'm Meera Mukherjee, and what I want to say is something slightly different, but something with what connected and what we were talking about. That we were talking about online dating and meeting people and this. So in India, we didn't date. We just met, married, and led a good life, happy life. Now, the grandchildren say, oh, you didn't date, you didn't meet many men. How boring is that? So what should be our reply to that? What do you think?
Do you know that I actually know people who have had arranged marriages who pretend to have dated each other because they can't take the pressure of saying they were in an arranged marriage?
I'm really intrigued, actually. I'm really intrigued about how an arranged marriage would work. I mean, do you just have to take...
It's worked 52 years for us. It's worked 52 years for us.
But you literally just, it's the first man that...
True. And I still adore him, so that's fine.
So someone else chooses him for you, and then you don't have to worry about it.
But the grandchildren really say, oh my, how boring.
But it worked for you.
Yes, it did.
And you didn't waste all that time looking at texts and
No,
seeing
no,
whether-
I grew and evolved. And I want to write.
You just got on with it. Well, I think there's a lot to be said for it. You know, maybe things will come full circle.
Yes.
And, yeah.
But
Less
you
choice.
don't look down upon it, do you?
What's that?
You don't look down upon it, do you?
Do what?
I don't think she looks down upon arranged marriage. That's not the impression I'm getting.
Look down.
She's asking, do you look down upon the fact that some people have arranged marriages?
No, absolutely not. I'm just really intrigued because it clearly works. I mean, in your case,
Yes.
and clearly often works. And there was a very good movie out this year called The Big Sick, which that was an issue in it. And I think as there's more and more choice and more confusion, it's very interesting. If you just have one choice and get on with it, is that better? Clearly it is.
Thank you. You boosted my confidence.
There's a man there. Let's ask the gentleman in the green sunglasses.
Are they green?
I don't know. I just said green.
Yeah, Helen, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
I am Pankaj, and the men in India are not insecure, they are much more emotional.
Really?
And they possess...
Do you agree, audience?
They possess more emotional...
That's a very incisive comment. Yeah, there'll be a riot in a minute.
they possess more emotional quotient. So I just wanted to ask that...
Do the women agree, by the way?
But the men, they do agree. So my question to you is that...
Well, wait a minute, let's just clarify our terms here.
Everyone agree with me that men are much more emotional.
Are you saying that men are more emotional than women?
In India?
Yes, certain times. You see, when there is any...
It sounds like you're making a statement. Is it a question or a statement?
My question is that what you find in your boyfriend more emotional quotient or intelligent quotient? What is that thing?
I don't understand the question. But
I don't understand it either.
Do you find more emotional or more emotional?
Emotional quotient should be more intelligence, emotional intelligence, or the
what?
intelligence quotient should be more in a boyfriend, in your boyfriend.
I think emotional intelligence is a perfect
Yes.
blend of the two.
That's what I was telling
Yeah.
you. That we
Yeah.
all possess more emotional quotient.
Okay, I think we're done with that. We have time for one final question. Who is going to ask that? Helen, I think you should choose who you want your final question from the audience
I
from.
can't. It's too much responsibility.
Helen clearly doesn't
I
like
can't.
choice, so we'll go with this lady over here. You look like a sensible person. Now, no pressure.
Hi.
Hi.
I need to know.
What's your name?
Sarika. I need to know why the name Bridget Jones. How did you come up with that name?
It was the silliest thing in the whole world. We just were doing this column so casually, and I had this friend who had a friend who was always getting into trouble with boys, and she was called Bridget, and it was always Bridget this and Bridget that. And then I just thought, oh, an ordinary name, Jones will do. It never occurred to me that I was called Fielding and that there was a writer called Henry Fielding who'd written Tom Jones. So later I tried to pretend it was a literary allusion, but actually it really wasn't.
So I'm going to ask you one final question to wrap up. If Bridget came to India, what would she do? Who would she see? And where would she go?
She would come to the Jaipur Literary Festival. And she would see you.
Thank you so much, Helen. That was absolutely wonderful. You can see you have a lot of fans here. Bridget has a lot of fans here. Let's give Helen a huge round of applause for creating.
That was great. Thank you.
Would you like to
so
say
lovely.
something to the audience before we go?
Yes, I'd just like to say what a wonderful festival this is. It's so bursting with energy. I've just walked in this morning. I can't believe it. I've never seen anything like this. I think Jaipur's a wonderful, wonderful place. It's magical, and I'm so very happy to be here, and thank you for asking me.
Thank you for being a wonderful audience.
Thank you so much for that very warm and entertaining